Consider this before viewing Don Quixote. What images come to mind when you think of romantic novels? What qualities do you think define a romantic hero? As you watch the program, see how Cervantes poked fun at romantic ideals and satirized the literature of chivalry and courtly love that was popular in his time. Why do you think the story of Don Quixote de la Mancha is still popular and relevant today? Assignment Discovery now presents Don Quixote.
Throughout history, there have been people who have challenged reality and dared to imagine the world as it could be.
And to the planets beyond. I have a dream today.
Among the great visionary leaders of human history, there is a literary figure who has taught us to dream of the world as we would like it to be. It is one of the most enduring, yet ridiculous, images in all of literature. A madman tilting at windmills. Even if you haven't read his tale, you probably recognize him. He is Don Quixote de la Mancha, an impractical and reckless idealist bent on righting all the wrongs in his world. On his sallies through the landscape of La Mancha, Don Quixote encounters hundreds of characters who laugh at his innocence, mock his idealism, and attempt to cure his madness. In places, Don Quixote seems nothing more than slapstick comedy. It's been called one of the funniest books ever written. But it is from the story's more profound themes of imagination and idealism that Don Quixote emerges a character worthy of 400 years of tribute.
Don Quixote is a man who lives solely on the power of his dreams, on the power of his imagination. He is capable of seeing a giant where there is only a windmill. He is capable of seeing an army where there is only a flock of sheep.
It was early in the 17th century that people first heard the tale of a Spanish country gentleman from a village in La Mancha.
Alonso Quijano so buried himself in his books that he spent the nights reading from twilight till daybreak and the days from dawn till dark.
Al rey perdió su lanza.
And so, from little sleep and much reading, his brain dried up and he lost his wits.
The books that drove this poor man crazy were romantic tales of courage and courtly love, stories like the legend of King Arthur.
It is really in the same type of fictional world as the novels in the grocery store, the Harlequin romances. These are novels about people who are superior to us and live in a world that's superior to ours and whose fortunes are worked out in heroic conflict and resistance and perseverance and all that.
No longer able to identify reality, Alonso Quijano steps into his literary world and becomes a knight-errant, just like those from his books of chivalry. Outfitted in an ancestor's armor, the old man discards his identity and declares himself Don Quixote de la Mancha. We have come to describe this type of vaulting ambition as quixotic, full of lofty yet seemingly impractical ideals.
It's very much like some really bad movies you've seen in your own lifetime here. You know, somebody thinks he's Superman, and he gets a uniform, and he becomes a kind of secret hero, and does all kinds of absurd things until at the end of the story it's realized that he's Charlie Jones from around the corner. People swept away by romances. That's what Cervantes was trying to tell people.
Wanting to get every detail of his knighthood right, Don Quixote decides he must have a lady. After all, King Arthur did have his Guinevere. Because he has no real love, our knight invents Dulcinea, a princess worthy of his bravery. It is to Dulcinea that he dedicates his quest.
As our brand new adventurer jogged along, he kept talking to himself, saying, "Oh, Princess Dulcinea, remember this your loyally dutiful heart, which has suffered so much for your love." And being thus totally preoccupied, he rose so slowly that the sun might have melted his brains, if he had any.
Any knight on a quest needs a squire. So with promises of riches from the spoils of battle, Don Quixote convinces a village simpleton to join him on his salad. Sancho Panza, with his peasant wit and common sense, is the antithesis of his irrational master. After pledging his life to Dulcinea and securing his sidekick, Don Quixote ventures into the world to fight against injustice. This quirky pair of wanderers was the creation of a little-known war hero named Miguel de Cervantes. The history of that ingenious gentleman, Don Quixote de la Mancha, has been a bestseller for nearly 4 centuries. The book is actually 2 books, written a decade apart. But today it appears as 1,000 pages of seamless adventure. Miguel de Cervantes drew upon almost 60 years of both heroism and defeat in his own life to create the complex characters and themes in his masterpiece. He was born sometime in 1547 and spent his youth traveling the Spanish countryside with his father, travels some believe would later inspire the wanderings of his mad knight. Though he had little formal education, Cervantes had a bright intellect and the spirit of an idealist. His unwavering belief in God and country led him to abandon a promising literary career in favor of military service. In 1571, Cervantes joined 28,000 other Christian soldiers who sailed south to defend their faith against the growing threat of the Turkish Muslims. Historians have called the Battle of Lepanto the D-Day of the 16th century. Though stricken with fever, Cervantes rallied on deck and led a charge onto a Turkish galley. The Christians emerged triumphant, and Cervantes a hero. Though victorious in spirit, Cervantes suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the chest and a maimed left hand. On his return voyage to Spain, Cervantes' ship was attacked by pirates, and he was taken to Algeria and held for ransom. After 5.5 years in slavery, Cervantes' family finally gathered the money to pay his ransom. Miguel headed home. Longing to resume the literary career he had abandoned to serve his country, Cervantes appealed to the king for help, in spite of his military heroism. Cervantes was turned away. Poor and crippled, Cervantes took a menial job as a tax collector. But with a mind more suited to fantasy than finance, he was soon arrested for irregularities in his bookkeeping. Jailed by a country he had served so well, Cervantes became disillusioned by the prospect of a failed life. His idealism began to erode.
Cervantes began life as an idealist, but Don Quixote was not written, of course, by an idealist. It's filled with dark irony. It's a book written in a great deal of pain. It is a book that's very funny also, and so the combination is strange.
Because reality defies his expectations, Don Quixote simply imagines the world to be born out of his books of chivalry. Everywhere he goes, he begins to see things as he would have them be, rather than as they are. A knight-errant cannot stay in a humble inn, so Don Quixote makes it a castle. Psychiatrists would call Don Quixote's altering of reality his coping mechanism. Don Quixote is a heroic figure to many because he uses his imagination to see the world as he would like it to be, as he needs it to be. Out of all of Don Quixote's peculiar adventures, there remains one episode which has captured our imaginations more than any other.
Los gigantes.
Sancho, he ahí los gigantes.
Look there, Sancho Panza, and see those wild giants, with whom I intend to do battle and to kill each and all of them.
Bajar, cobarde, cobarde. Caballeros con Mireya Dulcinea. Miles cobardes, miles cobardes. ¿Cuándo podremos dejar de luchar? Prometeo. Caballeros con Mireya Dulcinea. Con Mireya Dulcinea. Miles cobardes, miles. 15 caballeros de Plaza Messi. Bajar, cobarde, cobarde. Caballeros con Mireya Dulcinea. Miles cobardes, miles cobardes, miles cobardes, miles cobardes, miles cobardes.
As usual, things don't turn out the way our knight intended. But even though he ends up bruised and battered, his defeat is not what we remember about Don Quixote's joust with the windmill.
My mother and father were never educated a day in Italy or here. They were, some unkind person once said, illiterate in 2 languages. And I got to be governor of the state of New York. With no friends, no money, not particularly bright either. By working hard, being lucky, being in the right place. There's no telling a guy like me that Don Quixote was crazy. Maybe he missed the windmill, you know, maybe he needed a little more time. But if you don't try, you don't succeed. If you don't try grandly, you don't succeed grandly.
It is about the capacity to recover yourself from the dust where you have fallen, as Don Quixote falls many times, and renew the quest, not give up, and realize that life is not easy.
If John Kennedy had settled for realism at the time he said, I want us to get to the moon, how many people in the world thought that was realistic at the time that John Kennedy said it?
Part 1 of Don Quixote de la Mancha made Cervantes a celebrity as far away as the New World. But his fame did not free him from poverty. He continued to scratch out a living writing plays and short stories, but none approached the success of Don Quixote. It seemed what the public really wanted were more tales about his anachronistic madman. And they got them, but not from Cervantes. Part 2 of Don Quixote's adventures was a fake. Cervantes had been slowly working on his new adventures, but the forgery forced him to accelerate his pace. Almost a decade after the original, Cervantes published his Part 2, just 3 months after the irreverent fake.
Oh, Lord. Distinguished, or even plebeian reader, how you must be eagerly awaiting this prologue, expecting me to take revenge on, laugh at, and spit in the face of whoever wrote that second Don Quixote. But the fact is, I'm not planning to give you any such satisfaction.
Cervantes didn't need to take revenge. He simply wrote one of the best sequels of all time. Part 2 is still funny, but Cervantes has more than physical bumps and bruises in store for his mad knight. Instead of the harmless banter of Part 1, characters now encourage Don Quixote's delusions for their own amusement. One of the most humiliating episodes is when Don Quixote is invited to a castle by a duke and a duchess. Their objective? To laugh at his madness.
They, you could say, are an idle aristocracy without genuine purpose. They have time, money, idleness, and no purpose.
I think this is a tragic turning point in the novel, because up till then, Don Quixote could have believed that the most humble wayside inns were great palaces, and that the humblest of servant girls were princesses and duchesses. Now the dukes offer him his dreams in reality.
The Duke and the Duchess convinced Don Quixote that a lady of their court has died due to her unrequited love for the noble knight.
И в самом деле вообразили, что я умерла из-за вас, дом старый ты.
By staging such scenarios, the Duke and Duchess robbed Don Quixote of his ability to live by his own imagination.
This is the moment when Don Quixote begins his decline. This is the saddest book ever written, Dostoevsky said, because it is the story of a disillusionment. The tremendous thing about the dukes is that they destroy uncertainty. They establish reality once more, and it is an ugly reality. It is a reality made of meanness, hypocrisy, the cult of appearances, degradation of others, hatred for those who are not like you, ridicule for those who are different.
Soon after leaving the Duke's castle, Don Quixote encounters a character determined to destroy his illusions. Samson Carrasco claims his benevolent aim is to restore Don Quixote to sanity. To achieve the cure, Samson pretends to be a knight and challenges Don Quixote to a duel. As the victor, the Knight of the White Moon demands that Don Quixote renounce Dulcinea as the most beautiful woman in the world.
Don Quixote says, will then thrust the lance home. Kill me, because I will never renounce her. So he is literally prepared to die for this non-existent woman. He's being asked to give up the very core of himself, and that he is not prepared to do. He would rather die physically than forswear that most precious part of himself.
In defeat, Don Quixote refuses to renounce Dulcinea, so the Knight of the White Moon demands that he return home and give up knight-errantry. Forced to abandon his identity, Don Quixote surrenders his madness and once again becomes the sane country gentleman Alonso Quijano.
This is a tragedy. Here's a high idealistic knight who hits the stone wall of an uncomprehending reality and whose mission eventually ends in disaster. And he's defeated.
Lost in a sanity imposed by those around him, Alonso Quijano dies. He simply cannot live without his dreams. Cervantes has brought a book which started out as a string of silly skits to the point of tragedy. After a life filled with failure, Don Quixote's death seems to signal the final destruction of his idealistic spirit.
There is Don Quixote who goes back home and says, I am Alonso Quijano. I'm a poor hidalgo, a poor squire, I'm nothing more. But there's the other Don Quixote who goes forever living in the book, who will go forever battling windmills and attacking flocks of sheep.
We'll never know if Cervantes intended his Don to become such an inspirational figure. What we do know is that Cervantes, though he struggled with disillusionment in his later years, eventually returned to the idealism of his youth.
At the end of his life, Cervantes is still saying, I would rather have been at Lepanto and lost the use of my hand than be here today alive and well. I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
It seems that the same spirit that guided Don Quixote on his quest also sustained Cervantes throughout his life. At the end of his masterpiece, the author claims kinship to his creation.
Don Quixote was born only for me, as I for him. He knew how to act, and I how to write. Only we two are a unity.
Less than a year after finishing the tale of his mad knight, Miguel de Cervantes died as he had lived, well thought of, but not well cared for. He was famous throughout Europe, but his family still could not afford a headstone to mark his grave.
Keep watching. Discussion topics and activity and resources for Don Quixote are up next on Assignment Discovery. Now that you've seen Don Quixote, talk about this. Debate whether the character of Don Quixote is a tireless idealist or a mad fool. Why does he incite anger and ridicule in many of the characters he meets along his journey? Was he a happier man before he became Don Quixote de la Mancha? Explain your answer. Now try this. We never meet Don Quixote's love, Dulcinea. Write a scene in which Don Quixote finally returns to his Dulcinea. Will they live happily ever after? Be creative with your descriptions. Log on to discoveryschool.com for curriculum materials and resources to support Don Quixote. To learn more, Assignment Discovery suggests Spain in the Age of Exploration by Heather Miller.